Okay, welcome to the New View. We are here gathered together to enjoy a conversation with Denver Haslam, a good friend of mine that I've known for a couple of years now. And every week, I think I learn something new about you, Denver, that amazes me. And it certainly does start with the unbelievable experience you had with the skiing accident. I believe it goes back to when you were only a puppy, 26 years old or something like that. So it's obviously been a huge part of your life and your ability to eventually turn all of it into an amazing story of self-healing, which I think is one of the most enjoyable and most powerful ideas. I just love it. And I also want to comment on your recognition of women. I think that is most deeply appreciated by this particular group. So take it away. Oh,
Well,
great.
thank you. I'll start off with reading a poem that I wrote called A Man's Pledge. I solemnly swear not to forsake you in the quiet of night, for that is when I don my divine armor of light, to protect thee with the all of his loving might, and fulfill the sacred charge of my heavenly right. Rest well, fair women, for you are held tight, as real men awaken to see you in equal sight, for when you arise begins our arduous fight against those intent to lessen you in spite. So sleep now through this terrific good night. So a lot of that comes to my connection with my mom, because my mom's unconditional love is really the foundation of who I am. And I'm very, very close with her. And she's one of the reasons why I'm still here. So that's related to my accident, and I can get into that. So on February 2nd, 2003, I was 23 years old. I hit a tree skiing head first, doing about 45 or 50 miles an hour. And I sheared off all the transverse processes to the right side of my spine. So basically broke every vertebrae in my back, severing a lot of the nerve endings to the right. I shattered my right rib cage, shattered my right shoulder, tore all the ligaments in the right side of my neck, snapped my left femur, my left kidney split in half, my spleen exploded. I had 3 ribs that shredded my right lung, and the way that my trauma surgeon described them was as blunt daggers that were 6 to 8 inches through my right lung. And there was multiple other injuries, because my liver failed for like a month. My right kidney failed for like a month. I had a lacerated pancreas. And when an anesthesiologist friend of mine, who's a mentor of mine, challenged me kind of on how hard did I hit, my trauma surgeon mentioned to me, he has no doubt that I hit that hard, because I had an injury on him that he had never seen in his entire career. And this was a seasoned trauma surgeon. So he was the head trauma surgeon of the busiest trauma center in all of Colorado. So he got all mountain traffic. And he ended up becoming the head trauma surgeon for all of Centura Health, which was like a whole Front Range, like 20 hospital network. So he was by far one of the best in the world. And he said that I detached my entire chest wall on impact. So every single thing connected to my rib cage, all of it was ripped off. So I also had a severe traumatic brain injury, and I calculated out the forces in which I hit. And upon impact, I weighed 35 to 40,000 pounds on impact, and I pulled 500 to 600 G forces. So I calculated it out because my background was engineering. Because one of the reasons that I grew up in Texas, and one of the reasons I was in Colorado, was it was a few years after I graduated from the Colorado School of Mines with a mechanical engineering degree. So I had moved away from Colorado when I graduated to Seattle for about a year and a half or 2 years, and I had just moved back to Colorado, and I was there like a week or two, and that's when I had my accident. So the the accident's bad enough, but it gets worse. A lot of people are familiar with something called the golden hour. And just for the record, I remember hitting the tree. So I was doing a big Super G run. It was the last run of the day, which is normally the story. Um, and there was a ledge that I wanted to jump off of, and it was wind blown. And so when I went to shed speed, I basically lost my edge and went straight off. I was probably in the air for a good 150 feet. And I think I tried to put my leg down to slow down, and that's kind of how I snapped my femur. And I remember looking up and seeing this clove of trees. And I was like, oh shit, this is gonna hurt. And right before I hit, I turned my head this way. So the tree hit right here. And this is my right side since I'm looking at the camera. So it's and then something strange happened because I didn't feel pain like you would normally think. And time changed for me at that moment. So immediately, because I went through a quick self-assessment process because I knew I was hurt. I was like, I knew too much about physics to know in the human body to know that you can't hit that hard and not be hurt. So, I just did a self-assessment and I said, well, am I paralyzed? So I told myself, can I wiggle my fingers? And I couldn't. And I was like, that's bad. That's really bad. But I didn't feel paralyzed. So like I still had the awareness of my legs, even though I didn't have control of them. Or control of my body. So it was almost like my soul kind of disconnected from my body to some degree. So I then heard, are you okay? And I said, no. Do you need help? And I said, yes. And then immediately I heard ski patrol asking me, can you feel your legs and stuff? So there were these black spots in time to where my soul seems to have disconnected and I could enter and respond as necessary. But to me, it was seamless. So I didn't feel like I wasn't sitting there waiting, like, when are they going to get here? So it was I just noticed these gaps, this absence. But I really didn't feel pain, at least not yet. There was one pain that I felt, but what it gets interesting is normally they talk about the golden hour, but it took me 4 hours to get to the hospital. And this was partly due because the helicopter was grounded 10 minutes before they got my phone call for me. And that was because a blizzard was rolling in. So they took me down in a ground transport, which they don't get a lot of use. They may be less than 100 trips a year coming out of the mountains. So they actually used my case for many, many years to argue the funding for it because they're very expensive to upkeep. And these are not typical ambulances. These are trauma ambulances. So they carry blood product on them and as well as other things because they can do more procedures. So before we even got through Eisenhower Tunnel, I had already gone through a few units of blood. And there was a protocol because my flight nurse actually did things outside of protocol. And he trusted his divine intuition, which was beautiful. Like there are times, and I'll get into a little bit more into that here in a minute, but he actually had the foresight to call, and he lived in a little town. He grew up in a little town and lived in a little town called Georgetown, which was near Loveland ski area, which is on the other side of where the tunnel was. So, because my accident was as Arapahoe Basin, or A Basin, as most people know, is more of a local place, but it's near Keystone. So he actually called and with the blood bank, and so they actually had a manager of the blood bank come up. I don't know if it was in a pickup truck or what, but bringing up more blood product up to meet in tandem to try and make sure I got to the hospital okay, because they just ran out of blood. And he just said all he did was pump my veins with saline to keep them so that they wouldn't collapse. And he said I had no readable blood pressure and stuff, and he couldn't find a pulse on me and stuff. So I don't think technically I clicked out, like from, I don't know if I was ever pronounced dead, depending on how you look at it. So it was a pretty stressful moment at the time for the flight nurse. And he was seasoned. He was seasoned for about 7 years. His name is Peter Werlin. Incredible man. Um, and and we skied actually on my 20-year anniversary to the tree, and which was a few years ago. So and he may be retired now because he was getting pretty close to retirement, but it's the average career of a flight nurse is 7 years because of the strain and stress of it. But they'll always have that one case. And so I was his, and still remain his, one case of by far the worst case that he's ever had that actually survived. Um, so so there was, and it was during this trip was when I had my near death experience. And I've gone back and forth to where I call it kind of the invitation. Um, but I remember being just received in love, absolute unconditional love, no fear, no, just, it was, I didn't go through a tunnel or anything like that in which, but I remember seeing and being standing next to the creator, which was a divine light energy green. So there was no face or anything for me. It was just pure love in every regard. I'll never forget the feeling. And I felt it a few more times in my life, when I've had different challenges and connections with God, where I've felt the love and like wrap around me. But that gets into some other stuff. So when I was in that frame, the I was shown it was interesting because I was shown my life, but it wasn't in a manner of judgment. It was a manner of whether or not I was to come back or not. So it was really for my review. Um, and what was interesting is I could see the entire thing like a movie, but seeing the movie in one instant. So I could zoom in to see a specific incident and zoom out, but it actually took the way of a sine wave, which was very interesting to me. And I noticed that there was a huge upkick, like it just went, and I was like, oh, that's kind of interesting. And that was related to if I come back. So it was related to a purpose, or and I didn't zoom in to see what it was because it really didn't matter. It just, there was a purpose there that was connected to a divine duty, so to speak. And but one of the things that was very interesting was the creator wanted me to stay with him or her. So it was both feminine and masculine energy, both protective in the most unbelievable sense, but also in the most unconditional loving embrace. So it was a genuine a unity of the manifestation of both. It was stunning. And so, but it was interesting because the creator telling me that they wanted me to stay. And and I was and I remember, and this is basically the way that I kind of summarize this, but I essentially stated that I'm not concerned with what you want, I'm concerned with what you need. So it was 100% my choice to come back. And I also saw on a very personal level what would happen to my family, in the future if I didn't come back. I saw what would happen to my brother, my mother, my father. Like I knew exactly what was going to happen. And because this was outside of what our understanding of time and space is. So so I made that decision, and it struck me because when I talked to other experiencers of NDEs, yet a lot of them are told that they have to go back. So this element of the creator wanting me to stay, um, it gave me some context over the years because my life has been what a lot of people would connect to, a lot of suffering and that type of thing, and persecution, um, and a lot of heaviness and heartache. But at the same time, what is suffering in general? And to me, suffering is genuinely just an opportunity to learn, to love, and to grow more because we all suffer. It's part of it. But what's the point of it? And it really is an opportunity when you remove judgment from it, when you remove and it's not to minimize anybody's suffering. I mean, it's horrific, but what are you going to do with it? So are you going to use it to protect other people? Because if I just went through this storm and I fared, then what can I learn from that storm to help protect other people who may go through it? So so I believe that because I don't believe our suffering should ever be in vain. And how we continue to protect and watch over one another, I think, is where it's truly at. So going back to the accident, so I so I remember being back in my body, and I didn't ever feel like I didn't look down and see myself in an ambulance or anything like that. So I don't remember any of that. Um, but I do remember that my legs felt like they were on fire, and it probably had a lot to do with the fact that I had no blood in them whatsoever because I had so many internal injuries that I and but I had so but the thing that concerned my flight nurse probably the most was the fact that I actually I actually never complained of pain, and and that terrified him because it's the last stage of shock before you die. So I was in this last stage of shock for probably right when I hit the tree at 4 hours, which is, to my understanding, idiotic, um, because you just don't stay at that level. Um, so, but I remember just saying, oh, my legs. I remember because it felt like someone poured diesel fuel on them and lit them on fire. So I remember they had a pile of blankets on my legs. I remember this. And and one of the things though that I'm pretty sure I had a nasal canyon on for oxygen, but he said he did tell me this, and I don't know if he remembers this, but he actually mentioned this to me like a year or so after my accident, that he actually referenced me as a talking corpse. And he physically because he said he physically didn't want to touch me because he didn't want to affect what was happening. So he just wanted to do the absolute minimum that he could, but he allowed me the space to allow my will to fight. So he never put a mask on me for oxygen. He never did anything like that because he wanted me to speak, and keep talking. And so obviously him and I had a very close experience. And my mom actually ended up buying him the same cross necklace from James Avery that my mom bought me that I was wearing when I had the accident in eighth grade. Which I so and my mom wore it for me when I was in the hospital because I obviously had a trach and stuff. So, but he wore it as well. And things do come full circle because I started promoting helmet awareness because I had a helmet on. It helped save my life, and I'm a huge proponent of those. And I was raising money for that for a brain surgeon friend 5 years before I even had my accident. So I kind of became the poster child of that. And I gave one, my flight nurse asked me for one many years later, 10 years later, when his daughter challenged him, why do I have to wear one and you don't? And he's like, oh crap. He got me. She got me. And so he calls me up very, very humbly and says, Denver, can I get a helmet, please? And I said, I'm happy to. And things come full circle because he ended up having a very bad accident where he hit his head very hard. So, and that helmet saved him. So all these things come full circle when we embrace them. And that's very reminiscent of the resonance of the universe. So, but one of the things that he did is he actually gave me another chest tube, but no anesthesia or anything because I wasn't complaining of pain. So he cut in me and shoved a tube in me to make sure that if both of my lungs were collapsed, then, I had some relief. Um, but there was another thing that kind of occurred that I don't talk a ton about. So after I made the decision with the divine and I came back, there was a battle that took place within me where something was trying to remove my soul from my body. And I had never heard of, and I don't know if I've ever spoken about this publicly. Um, and because I sometimes attributed it to, maybe it was a second, invitation or what, but there was a difference to it. It wasn't the divine loving. There was a battle that actually occurred like within my soul from something else. And it didn't feel malevolent. But it was intent. And I never heard the phrase, and it wasn't until probably 6 years ago that someone mentioned the phrase of walk-ins, where souls try and one soul leaves and another soul comes in. And I was like, yeah, well, some of those things resonated, but basically what happened was there was an energy that was battling me to go home and telling me to go home, and I dug in, gripped my teeth, and was like, no. And this was what I think my flight nurse was actually referencing when he stated that he witnessed me battling something. He said I was literally fighting something that he witnessed. And it was is pretty interesting. So I won't go too much into what I think it might have been and that kind of stuff, but it's something to note because but it was connected to the divine, but it was it could have been a angelic, like an archangel or something possibly. So it was is what the energy kind of felt with, and maybe it was a challenge of worth on me. And it's interesting because it gets very multi-leveled. So but anyways, I ended up getting to the hospital, and things continue to kind of get interesting. So I went into, because this is actually kind of important to point out, because emergency medicine is pretty fascinating, and my case actually helped alter the protocols of emergency medicine because they went so far out of the protocols to make me live that it was that they ended up speaking about my case for 5-10 years after, all around the world. So so there was at St. Anthony's where I went, they had something called a T10 room, and it goes right by admittance. It gets you straight into the OR as fast as humanly possible. To just try and, so I went directly into the T10 room, and they normally have special elevators and all that kind of stuff. And I was so fortunate to have the trauma surgeon I did, because he was amazing. And there's another divine incident which comes in with a synchronicity that I'll get into, that I haven't mentioned a ton with people, because these are the details that, it's just if you have the time to listen to them. But but when the surgeon was actually working on me, he opened me up and said he didn't even know where to start. He said nothing was where it's supposed to be, and he said it was a belly full of blood. And he as he's working on me, the power went out. So all the machines keeping me alive, everything going on, just everything pitch black. And because it was a blizzard. And he said, you got to be effing kidding me. Get me a blank flashlight. And because it took, and so the generators did eventually turn on, but it must have felt like an eternity for him. because that is the worst time for that to occur. And it takes a lot to knock out a hospital. It that is not a subtle mission because they have special lines and stuff to keep, and they have high priority for that reason. So it's not something that happens very often. So um, and then subsequently, I was bleeding so bad that they there was a experimental drug at the hospital. It was the only hospital in Colorado that had it, called Factor 7A, and it was a I think it was a coagulant because it to stop bleeding. And and I was the fifth person in the United States to ever get it and the second to survive by it in the case of trauma. And everyone in the OR said, "Don't give it to me." And to my understanding, the trauma surgeon looked at everyone and said, "This isn't a democracy. Give it to him." And ended up saving my life. And I went through 130 units of blood. So that's about 16 gallons. And I also went and met with 50 of my blood donors, um, who I wouldn't be here without them. So I was able to meet 50 out of the 130, which is pretty damn magical for me. And seeing the incredible group of individuals of all race, creeds, religions, it was magical to be able to just thank each one of them for my life. And in something that is very altruistic for most people to give blood, it really is. Because I mean, most people don't like needles, for the one, and so that and they're not getting paid for it. They're not getting compensated for it. It is true. It is like putting up your shopping cart at the at the grocery store after you use it because there's no awards coming for you or anything like that. It's truly an act of selflessness of trying to just do the right thing. And it was just really nice to be able to genuinely say thank you for them, because anything that I achieve in life is a testament to them helping me. So now there's a point that I want to cover, that I want to touch on, because it does matter. And it's the emotional connection when you're fighting for someone's life. So I mentioned the anesthesiologist that challenged my flight nurse, or challenged me with how hard I hit. He was a mentor of mine. At my fraternity, he's one of the reasons I was doing the skiathon like 5 years before, to help raise money for the helmet awareness, because he was friends with a brain surgeon at that hospital and that type of thing. So he actually, when he found out, because I was on the mountain with a fraternity brother or two, so the call, by the time the call got to him, he actually coached little league with my my trauma surgeon. So when I was in CAT scan, so he tried calling Charlie and was like, "Hey, call me immediately." And so when I was in CAT scan, they had a brief conversation on the phone. And my my friend, his name's Dr. Paul Leo, anesthesiologist, he said, "I don't care what you have to do, but you will not let this kid die. Do you understand me? You will not let this kid die." And and it creates an emotional connection of, you're not just fighting for a stranger, you're fighting for basically a close friend's son. And so it's amazing when you kind of get that emotional connection. And so it's important to mention that, because in hospitals, it's so often people are basically bagged and tagged. Here's a number, this is what you are. And it's not. You're dealing with human beings. And that's so often missed. Innocent lives are everyone is as valuable as the next. And it's so easy to get lost in that when people, I just don't, and we need to root into that. Um, I mean, that's where our humanity really comes in, because one innocent life lost is too much. Um, so anyway, so that was basically my accident. So it got stranger from there for me because I basically awoke and ended up living an alternate reality for a year while I was in a drug induced coma for almost 6 weeks. So, so I thought I had already gone through rehab. You know, I had a girlfriend. I was still doing outpatient rehab at the house. Her parents were helping me. But it was a girlfriend that I didn't have in real life. I had in this alternate reality. So I literally lived an alternate reality. And and there's pictures of me when I came back into this reality to where my eyes are like what the hell because because I'm trying to make sense of the world. Um and it was a very odd moment. I mean, obviously there's a lot of odd moments, but but I'll get and so this will get into the manifestation of the healing. So, but the reality part was very strange because I remember working and it was like I remember making phone calls for pizzas and it was really subtle details working on motorcycles and working on a carburetor and like I mean just things that I was just like what it was yeah it was very odd um and very confusing because when I woke up like where I thought I placed something somewhere I couldn't remember where I placed something and I remembered it in one reality but not the other, so that was really weird. So it was it didn't happen too many times, but it happened a few times where I was like, I expected something to be there and it wasn't there. And I was like, so it took a little bit of getting used to. But so the healing part, the reconnection part is really fascinating for my soul. So as I was kind of coming back into awareness, my soul felt disconnected from my body still. And like I because I remember just wanting us my mouth was so dry I just wanted water and it would take all my concentration to like to try and because I was trying to scoot over to the sink to try and get some water, but I was trying to and I would take all my focus and concentration to kind of move my toes like that to try and move the chair and I couldn't. And I tried for hours trying to figure out how to do it. And but there was something that occurred when a nurse, I can't remember her name, but I'll always remember her voice because she had a really heavy, husky voice, and very deep in tone, a bit harsh. But she was super sweet and she was really sassy, but not with me. She was always kind with. She was always very kind. Um, but I could hear her barking at people in the background and stuff. And so um, it's but she got a popsicle and it was orange, and because they have twin pops at the hospital, or they used to, and she broke one, and she's like I'm not supposed to be doing this, but what the hell. And I think she was just listening to divine guidance at that point. And she literally just the smeared it kind of on my mouth because I was trach, so everything would get sucked out and she would suck it out. But and she just smeared it. And when those and the flavor, like it just like I felt it was, I don't want to use this word, but it's the best word for the description of it is like it was like orgasmic on a level that I can't explain because it was like my body was coming back online, like everything was connecting back, and and it was like reawakening and reconnecting my entire soul to my body. And so it was unbelievable. I mean, I remember having dreams of popsicles like for days, like, going in as like a spy agent trying to break into someone's apartment to go get popsicles and stuff. And so like it was and I still like popsicles. Okay, I'm not gonna. Okay, Johnny Pops, the watermelon ones. Oh, those are divine. So if you haven't tried those, they're at Sprouts and a few other places, and they're really good. Anyway, I digress. But huh? I don't know if y'all have tried them, but they're worth it. So it's but the popsicles, but it helped, but it reconnected. But the best way of saying is it reconnected my soul to my body, and that's when I came back into awareness of this reality, um, of of our base reality, if you will. So from there, I was like, holy crap, I'm in bad shape. I couldn't move. I couldn't. I mean, I had complete atrophy in my body. So I went in and I built my body up. It's like I spent 10 years building my body up to survive that accident. So, I mean, I was basically a power lifter and was near Olympic level conditioning. Um, so it was never drank, never smoked, never done drugs, never very clean body. So I was the perfect, specimen, if you will, to even, I don't want to relegate myself to a specimen, but the point being is that's the level of conditioning that I had when I had my accident. So, which had a lot to do with my survival. I know it did. But when I came back into this awareness, I was like, how in the hell can I even like, because I can't move. So how can I work out to even do like how can I like the process of it? I was just like, that was so my go-to of getting stronger and being fit and being healthy. All those were taken off the table for me. So, and I thought about it for about 24 hours. And I remember the divine talking to me and telling me, if you want to come home, you still can. I would happily receive you and love you, and I would never hold it against you. So please come home if you feel you need to. And so I felt that love and that warmth. And in honor of that question, I gave it 24 hours. I didn't know, I didn't have a clock. So, I mean, basically, sun up, sun down. It's basically is kind of how you tell time when you can't see clocks and you can't, you basically just see the sun that comes up. But, I remember it because I was still on dialysis because they were doing an ultrasound and that type of thing. But uh, I basically, I really thought about my mom and I thought about everyone, and everyone knew me never to give up, ever. And I made a promise to my mom, and this was connected to me coming back from God's original invitation. And it was my mom had basically been violated by every man in her life, every man that she was close to. And my grandfather, not necessarily, but he had just died. Like, so when I was a teenager when he died. And so, and without getting into family stuff, it just, so my mom was very broken at that point in her life. And I remember going up to her as a young teenage son, and I looked at her and I told her, I said, I'll be the one man who will never abandon you. So it makes me get emotional. And she remembers this. I don't think she realized how much I meant it. um, but I did. So when I was thinking about that, I thought about that. And so I said, okay, and I don't know how I'm going to do it. I have no idea how. But I said, from this moment forward, I choose to be out of the ICU in 24 hours. And this is after being in the ICU for almost 6 weeks. So, um, and I think y'all might have saw some of the pictures from the article and stuff of what I looked like essentially at that point. But when I made that decision, there was no doubt in me at all. And there was just love, and there was just peace and harmony within. But there was conviction. And an eternal constitution that I had and have within myself that I exercised. And from that moment, my organs started working again. And I remember, because right before I made the decision, I remember the respiratory therapist coming in and saying, we're going to be taking you off the trach, taking you off the ventilator. And we really hope that you can breathe. And because they really didn't know what was going to happen, and when I made that decision, my kidneys started functioning again, my liver started functioning again, I started breathing on my own, and I was out of the ICU in 48 hours. And subsequently, I found out that I actually ended up regrowing a small spleen, of which I completely destroyed. So much so that my trauma surgeon couldn't find any of it. He said it exploded. It just exploded, and he couldn't find any of it. So, but when I made that decision, I didn't have to understand how the body worked. I didn't have to understand the science behind it, the reductionist stuff. I didn't have to understand any of that. It was just the love and the connection within myself with divine healing. Agreement with God, a coherence is probably a really good word. A coherence with the divine nature. And I've used that method before when it comes to, I got really sick one time and had pancreatitis to where my pancreatitis stopped working. And my numbers were off the charts, and I was very, very ill. And I remember going back into that method and doing that method, and I was able to get my pancreas to start working again and get my numbers, back to where they needed to be within a time that the doctors were unable to explain. So they just wrote it off as errors in this or that, or they just didn't know what. Most doctors don't know what to do with me. So, there's still healing that I still work on. I had, I still have some partial paralysis. I'm still working on regrowing some of those nerves. Nerves are notoriously slow to regrow. Rebuilding my brain, because I basically wiped I had to relearn how to communicate completely. So I didn't know how to respond to someone when they said hi. So I had to go through every single possible response that I could come up with. And I've had to do that with basically every single conversation ever since then. So it also means that I'm deeply introspective because of this, and trying to understand the nature of reality as we see, and how it kind of connects to all. But that's kind of where this manifestation of healing comes in. And I still have chronic pain, but I don't use pain medication. And there are days where it's pretty rough, but I try and manage it. I try and take the best care I can with so I do a lot of different rehab exercises. I think movement, is very important. I think being kind to yourself is very important. Our self-talk is critically important. And there's some some other stuff that I won't get too much into, but I had some abuse trauma and some stuff related to that from when I was a kid. Um, that was not associated with my parents, but with others. And and then after my accident, where I was taken advantage of and things like that. But I tried not to. I tried to always follow just kind of the divine intuition within and that divine guidance. And I'll kind of touch on this because this is an important part when it comes to suffering and especially the world, because there are a lot of people dealing with struggles and stuff right now, especially in the climate in which we have. Um, there's so much oppression, and there's so many psychological operations going on right now that it's very difficult to discern truth. So there's a divine discernment that I kind of default to, or that I work on developing within myself, which is connected to the intuition and calm, which is why, doing box breathing, doing ice water face plunges, doing anything that can help trigger the parasympathetic response system so that we can stay in that is really important, because that's really where we can really harness that intuition within, um, and that state of calm, which gets back into kind of an analogy I mentioned earlier that I don't think was recorded, so I'll mention it now, which is the kind of an analogy that I use of a hurricane, where becoming the eye of the storm is kind of, so there's a tornado, but if we continue to be the loving light within, it actually pushes that darkness, pushes those things away from us, and we build a healthy boundary. um, there's a roadmap to the soul that I actually created that I haven't released. That in time, it's coming soon to where that will need to be shared with people, where people will be open to receiving it. But there's a so people might be interested to know this, of how do you become kind of the light within? How do you kind of embrace it? So I'll cover this because I think this is important for people. So I was being very heavily persecuted for, and charged with crimes that I did not commit. And I had people who took advantage of me, after because of my head injury was pretty severe. But my soul was good. So I still did the best I can and still do the best I can in every way I can. So there was, but when darkness and stuff keeps and just pounding and pounding and pounding and pounding on you like it's trying to snuff out your light, there was a point that I came to where it wasn't really surrendering to it, because that's giving up, and I'm not a big fan of giving up. So, um, but there's a release, because there's a conscious recognition to where I release myself so that I may be received. And it's interesting because it's by the light, but it's almost going through the light back to the original source. So you're being fully received and embraced. So, in some cultures, it might be release and be received by the ancestors, which was, relayed to me by an ancient seer. Um, but it's when I did that, it was the effortlessness of it, where I basically, what it felt like and what I saw was basically, I basically went into kind of a critical mass form where I supernovaed to a light, like a light ball. And because I kept because I kept going towards the light at the end of the tunnel, and then I would joke that I would pick up the flashlight and keep throwing it so I could keep finding my way through the caverns of darkness. And but then the light went out, and I was like, okay, now what I had to do. And then that's when I realized that I could become the light, and that I could use the energy of the light of the loving source within, that we all have access to through our souls, to do that. And this is where I was shown where actually healing comes from, like natural, divine, spiritual healing actually originates is from this energy source, from this divine love. And so that was what I was shown, and that is basically how I began to build the eye of the storm and push everything back. So taking something from that would look like a tornado, basically, to pushing the rest of it out. And it wasn't with aggression or anything like that. It was just being in that state of calm. And the more that I cared for myself and loved myself unconditionally, and then there was a theory that I had where, with the darkness coming in, I said, you know what? I said, the more darkness that tries to intrude and inject into me, the more that tries, the more love and light I'm going to give to the rest of the world. And so the more I had people, trying to do this or that, and so the kinder I was to all those people who were so deserving of it, that I was divinely shown this person needs a hand. So I would just be kind and loving wherever I could be. And I used to joke that, that the I was, and because I got to the point where I was like, just telling the darkness, I was like, if you keep doing this, I was like, all you're going to do is eradicate yourself, because I'm just going to give more and more light to the rest of the world. So the more darkness you put into me, is all you're going to do is just keep fueling me for light. So, because I figured out that the only place that darkness can't exist is in the light. So, so basically I just continue to manifest that. So, so those are a few of my experiences with healing. So I want to open it up to questions, if people wanted a little bit more detail about something or what, but that kind of encapsulates or covers kind of the majority of kind of that journey. So hopefully that helps with a little bit about me.
Thank
Wow.
you, Denver. I I did want to ask you, because I feel like you're a kindred spirit to me, and I've had my own profound experiences, and I remember uh, the key one was when I was in my early 20s, and it was learning how to forgive, how to accept, and how to love, and that was huge, and it helped me overcome my fear of death. And then I became politically aware, like my dear friends here, and we've all been working, I'd say most of our lives, trying to make the world a better place and to rectify what we feel the greatest causes of suffering and on the planet. But it's a challenge, I think, for all of us when we wake up in the morning, is like, okay, what can I do that will be of most benefit to the world and to life? How do I navigate when you have the freedom and the time and the energy, and that's where your heart is? You want to heal, you want to help. And I think with your experience, especially getting some input from the divine, what is your method of choosing uh, how to navigate through life when you wake up in the morning?
That's a really good question, especially because I still, one of the things that I struggle with the most, from my head injury, is concentration and focus. Um, I used to be very, very good at stepping back from a problem and seeing it from like a 30,000-foot viewpoint, and then going in and being able to do the step-by-step work, and as you would imagine an engineer would do. But I actually have a lot harder time doing that now. So doing the simple remedial steps I actually struggle a lot more with. But the depth of which I see things changed. And there's only one way I've learned to describe this, because, and this actually gets into manifestation. And this is kind of a backwards way of answering your question, but I will get to a direct answer. Okay. So if you think about how people, if you see how people color in between the lines, a lot of people color in between the lines. Some people intentionally color outside of the lines. Some people just ignore the lines. And I used to be one of those people who would kind of do all of them. I would be all over the place. But there was something that really interesting happened when I had my accident, was that I just didn't see paper anymore. So there's a manifestation of reality in which I saw. So what we are coloring is the world with our love and our light. So to answer your question, I still sometimes struggle with it because there is a lot of noise. But where I find the most peace, and when I know I need to act, there is a divine resonance within me. And there is a saying from when I lived in Colorado I lived up in the mountains of Colorado for a little while. There was a saying from an old wise woman where, if it doesn't make your soul sing, don't do it. And there's so much wisdom in that simple statement that when you feel divinely guided, you will know. And it is like a key into a lock. And as you begin to listen to it, it's interesting, because it really comes down to that openness and that curiosity. And the way that I will tend to do it is I'll communicate with the universe. And this comes into kind of an important point, to where when it's interesting, because science seems to do this a lot, where it dictates to the universe how the universe works, which is pretty arrogant. So so one of the things that I do is I ask the universe. So instead of talking at the universe, I talk to it. And I talk to it with love, because I absolutely firmly believe in my deepest root that we were all made with unconditional love. And that's what actually spurred the universe. And when I lovingly asked God, or the creator, how did the universe come to be? What I was shown was, it was the creator's loving intention to want to love itself more unconditionally. And that intention is what actually gave rise and birthed the universe. And then each one of our souls is like a tiny cell of God that is learning this journey to learn to love more unconditionally, so that we can take that back to the whole. And this is outside of a religious order, but might have a little piece here and there and that kind of thing. And so, but this is what I was shown. And so it's interesting, because when you release the judgment of things, when you release and this comes back to kind of the release and you will be received. It's because control itself is an illusion. There's so many moving pieces, so many moving parts in the world, that we can't control anything. And even if we stop here, the earth is still spinning and we're still moving through space. So it's all dynamic. So it's interesting, because I just ask. And and this comes down to something that I guess this will probably come down into: the more you love yourself unconditionally, the easier those answers come to you. The more you love yourself unconditionally, the more connected we become to humanity and get closer to God. So it's interesting because it's not in a selfish manner, but there's an element that I do want to point on, because it really is pertinent to kind of the world in which we live, is the way that because how do you choose to live an innocent life in an overall destructive society? And this was something I had to deal with, like, I don't know, 14 years ago. This question was because I refused to waive my innocence. I said, I choose to be innocent. I will not give up that. But I had to learn something called sophistication. And the definition of sophistication in this way was, choosing to live an innocent life in an overall destructive society. And the way that you do that is by learning to be proactive, not reactive. So if you know you're going to be going into a hostile territory, then taking proactive measures to protect yourself is important, however that may need to be. Knowing about the law is important, so other people don't abuse it. So all of these aspects really came into play because protecting yourself, because and how unconditional self-love really came to be was I asked the divine, if you could give us a second gift besides divine free will, what would it be? And it was unconditional self-love. And the answer was given to me directly, but it was a journey for me to understand it. So how does one love others unconditionally? Because that sounds like an impossible feat. And I spent years trying to figure this out in interactions of meeting people, and like how, and I made more mistakes than I could ever document. I mean, I'm the master of mistakes, but that's how I learned. And so the answer, and then when I was ready, the answer was shown to me. And the way that I love others unconditionally is wanting nothing from them except for them to love themselves more unconditionally. And that's when I was told that is where the seed of empathy lies. So I was told basically the summation of that is unconditional self-love is the answer to all, because it's where the seed of empathy lies. So to answer your question directly, with the universe and what to do most beneficial is to lovingly ask it, and with a level of openness and curiosity, and it will communicate it to you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Hopefully that helps.
No, it's a very, thank you very much. I just, when I was a child, I remember learning, what is life? Life is love, and love is wanting to be loved. And I've always found that's an incredibly truthful statement, and it's worked my whole life.
Well, and children are going to be the root of that level of truth. There was as a child, I would, it's children's truth that seems to resonate the deepest, because they can see it in a manner which, and they're closer to the creator. So, which is why the darkness preys on them too, which is why we have to be proactive and protect them, because there's a lot of darkness in this world going after that element. And that's one of the ways that we have to, and this gets into a component that I won't get too much into because it's a heavy one, but the soul of humanity is hemorrhaging right now. And we have to rescue the children. Because is humanity worthy of moving forward if we don't? And I don't believe it is. I don't believe it's redeemable if we do not address this aspect of the children. So that's one of the things that I work on the back end with some other stuff. But like I said, I won't get too much into that. It's so there's that component, and then there's the healing component, which is on the opposite side of that. So if you see it as like kind of a loving cylinder, we have the hemorrhaging on the bottom end, and then the healing component on the top. So and so, but it's something that you can work at from both ends. So, and that's one of the things that I'm trying to do, whether it's with alternative healing methodologies. Now, I'm glad I brought this up because it reminds me of the thing that I wanted to share earlier in the other call that I don't know if it was recorded or not, but it's the healing light within. And this is going to be an interesting thing to share with y'all. So, a friend of mine, an incredible doctor, he's an internal medicine doctor. He's now retired. He began seeing the corruptions of the system, and he started doing a lot of work with light therapy, and specifically the firefly. So, and he got to know the inventor of the firefly, and started doing clinicals with it and working with it, and thousands and thousands and thousands of patients, and just and decades of work with it.
What is it,
And
Denver? What is the firefly?
it's a specific light therapy device
Uh-huh.
that he used and actually helped the inventor develop over the years. So it's now I will say that my doctor friend, he doesn't put a lot of, he thinks that the Rife technology that the Firefly is selling is overstated and not, he thinks it's too premature with what they're doing. And he has a lot of clinical experience with testing it and trying it and didn't see much of the improvements. But the light that the company sells, he absolutely does. And there's a presentation that I can send y'all that can be shared with the group if y'all are interested in seeing that. But there's a really interesting component that, and he doesn't have an answer for this, what I'm about to share with you. And I went out and visited him a few months ago. But so, because basically you use infrared to see inflammation in the body, you apply the light onto the body and the inflammation goes away. So he was working with one patient. He forgot to turn the light on. So the machine was on, but he forgot to turn the light on. And do you know what? The inflammation, it got better. And so what mechanism was working in that regard? So and the inventor was like, there's no way this is possible, and told him he was a quack and all this other stuff, which is ironic because that's kind of how they originally met, because the doctor saw his stuff in the back of a magazine and was like, hey, are you a quack? And what? So it was kind of funny because it was like the tables kind of were reversed. But basically, and he's done this thousands of times to, where it has like where he's seen it work. And it actually changed the design of the reflector and the light. And so what seems to be happening, okay, what is theorized that is happening is the divine light within us is hitting the reflector and then being pinpointed back into the point of inflammation and healing itself. So when we talk about divine healing light, like that, just the thought of that is just incredible to me. And when you see it scientifically in imaging, that it's just, I wanted to mention this piece to y'all because from the healing aspect, it is absolutely fascinating. And I've been doing a few of my own tests, like very rudimentary tests by taking a flashlight reflector and actually seeing, like, if I hold it up to like my cheek, because I tend to have a lot of tension in my cheek. And so, and just so you know, with light therapy, that's one of the places where you can feel it release, where you apply it, and then you kind of open it and you feel the difference in tension in your jaw. So I've been playing with it a little bit to see that. So, but it's a very fascinating possibility. And the other thing that I've been contemplating is there a way of concentrating energy from the light like that? I think I might have done this when my organs started working again, because there's a way of, if you think of the sun and how solar flares or coronal mass ejections occur, can we concentrate and will a concentration of power within the divine loving light and concentrate it at the organ or the area of inflammation that we need rectified, and then release it to have that being done? And if there is imaging that they're using to validate the light therapy, then that also means that there's a potential for this theory to be tested. So it's very interesting, because I think that might have been what I did when I made that divine choice within, where I embraced that loving light. And the purity of the love and the lack of doubt within myself is what really removes the barriers or the boundaries of power related to it. So those are a few elements that I know that those statements are very deep and are worthy of some contemplation.
Denver,
Go ahead.
Denver, have you come across Saint Germain and the Violet Flame?
Not the violet flame, but
Okay,
I'm
this is an
familiar with Saint Germain.
entire book on the Violet Flame. Elizabeth Clare Prophet bringing forth Saint Germain's teachings. And the Violet Flame I believe the Violet Flame is a visualization that has been imbued and embedded with the light energy you're talking about. It's very powerful. You can send the violet flame throughout your body to any place that's inflamed or distressed or aching or needs healing. You send it to other people. You hold it to heal and repair relationships. Absolutely any intention for healing is magnified with this simple visualization of this very powerful violet flame.
Well, no, thank you for sharing that. I'll look into that, because I absolutely believe that this is non-local.
I think that's
So
what you're talking about. I believe that this ascended master, Saint Germain, has energized this violet flame image, visualization, and that is what you're talking about. It just resonates for me that this is the same one and the same goal and intention here.
Well, and I think that there's a very similar resonance when we're speaking about something that our own personal experiences have led us to.
Yes.
And I think that's where the lived experience has power. And also, one of the things that makes it so important is in how it's connected to the internal flame within, or the divine light, is the fact that it's a singular consciousness. That we are our singular consciousness. If we're a cell of the same organism, so to speak, of the divine, then that is a non-local. So even though we perceive that we have distance, in reality we don't. So going back to Carol's question, so when you think about the darkness in the world, what I see is this mesh net of light embracing souls that continue to shine. And I do believe that there is a critical mass component to where, when we continue to shine light, no matter where we are in the world, that net that's being cast continues to resonate within. And as we gain more consciousness and more awareness of it, our power of it gets more deeply rooted. And there's an effortless, because I can easily understand kind of the trepidation with it, but there's an effortless when you begin to receive it. That's why the release and you will be received is such and from the divine space, that keeps being repeated to me over and over and over again. So when in doubt, release and you will be received. When in doubt, release and you'll be received. And there's there's an interesting thing too, is like a small exercise where if you're in a very noisy state and you're trying to basically hijack out of it, if you will, like following the tethered light within. I'll mention this piece because it's kind of counterintuitive, but I'm confident y'all will resonate with what I'm talking about. So if you see something similar to like a tornado and you're flowing around and you're just caught in the noise of the information of the world, or the emotions of the world, there is a light tether, or a cord, that some people call it a cord. It's however you see it, but or a lighted rope. And I've always seen it in the tornado. And if I reach out for it and and I strain to try and reach it, it gets farther away. But if I lovingly ask it to come to me and I find a peace within, I find that it actually comes to me, kind of like a Jedi trick. And so as it comes closer to me, I just find, and it builds up my confidence, and I'm like, oh, it's coming. And then I'm like, but then if I get too excited, then it will go farther away, and then I have to stay in that moment. And I go, okay, I gotta stay in the moment, and I have to deep breathe, and then I say, okay, I love you. Please come to me at your convenience, and know that I'm here and I'm safe, and I'm, and we'll go together. So, and I just open my heart with love and curiosity and kindness. Anyways, it comes to me, and as I grab it, I begin to pull myself into it, and I begin pulling down to where the core of the tornado is. And so where I get down to the bottom, and I get back to the source of light. And so now there is a thing that I'm looking into that is interesting, because there is a point that I do believe that there is a point past the light, which goes back to prior to creation, which is, from a scientific perspective, it could be looked at the 0 point energy field, which is suspended, and like where you're basically floating. It's not darkness, you're in the void, but that void. So there is another layer to that I won't get too much into. It's one of the things I'm looking into. But so there's a light healing, and then there's a void healing as well, where the void healing is prior to creation. And so there is a point past that, which is, I believe, where the unconditional creator spirit originated from. But that's one that I'm playing with. So
We'll take a deep breath on that one and just feel it. Denver, you mentioned the experience, and then we'll go to Liz. You mentioned where you were in the coma and like you were living an alternate life.
Mhm.
Okay. Channeling group I participated in some years talked about how some souls can incarnate in more than one body at once. And they gave us examples of that. Because it's a way to learn a lot of lessons quickly if you are incarnate in two simultaneous bodies. So as you were telling us about that, I thought, well, maybe he was then tethered to another synchronous incarnation of yours that allowed you to stay grounded with a 3D plane through an alternate avatar, if you will, of yourself. Just thought to mention that.
It may have been. It's interesting, because I've often viewed my own life as living 10 lifetimes in one.
You may
Like,
be.
just with, yeah. And so yeah, maybe quite literally. So so it's an interesting thought. So, but it's the thing that I do want to point out is the more I learn, the more I realize I don't know. And there's an interesting thing that I was shown in terms of kind of what truth is. And it's related to dimensions, with the dimensions of reality, and that it's kind of outside the scope of what we're talking about. But it's, to know is kind of I don't want to say low vibration as in implying that it's low. It's just more the reality in which we, like the 3D world, is to know, kind of from my perspective. And then to see is kind of the unified, or not unified, but that's kind of the shared reality in which we exist in everyday world, which is kind of the momentum-based realities of time and space and that kind of thing. But then there's another one is to be, which is kind of the unified consciousness. And then there's the higher one, which is to feel, which is truly the root of the manifestation of creation and everything. Because really the power of love is where all this comes from, you know, and there is no greater power than that. I mean, I've been shown that is what gave creation to everything. So
Well, thanks. Liz had her comment.
Yes, I did want to bring up something. It's a question and also my own idea about this possibility. If you feel that your experience really grounded you in a very unique way, that actually completely separated you from some internal doubt that is very hard to override. And I believe doubt is one of the biggest bugaboos that most of us humans have because it interferes with our gut instinct. And we all know that we've been told over and over, your first instinct is the one you should always go with. It's almost a universal law. And it's so easily interrupted in that what you were able to really experience because of the profound intensity of how it all happened, it opened up like that whole channel and just clarified. It just clarified you. It's there. It just removes all of this internal, like you're talking about the this kind of an internal dialogue, like an argument you might have with yourself, and you don't want to have an argument with. You talk about loving yourself. Well, I'd say a good way to start would be don't argue with yourself. Listen to yourself, and you have different parts of self that all have to have a shared experience. I think of the five senses, and I know there are 12, but I'm going to just deal with the five for the point, okay? You know, when you taste something, that's a story. When you see something, that's a story. When you feel something, that's a story. When you sense something, that's a story. So when you think of it, you're literally getting all these perspectives, and you have to be aware. There may be a dominant one for certain experiences, but they're all giving you an aspect of something. And I think sometimes you forget about parts of the story that are your own story. And that's some of the battle that we have with ourselves. And we've been, you know, in some cases, we've been led to believe that these things are not that important, whatever. But anyway, my point to you is the very concept of self-doubt as the one of the most, you know, a core crisis that it creates in so many of us is that inability to learn how to totally trust yourself.
Well, and that's because what is doubt? And it really is kind of the manifestation of fear.
Yeah.
And fear in itself is an illusion. Fear didn't exist when I died. So basically when you mirror fear onto itself, it realized the illusion that is and it disappears. So so after my accident, when I came back, I absolutely had a removal of doubt. And so, but then getting back into the world, that I got bombarded with the doubt of the world, which I became hypersensitive to where I actually struggled going out for there was a time when I couldn't go out for like a year because I was being inundated with so many emotions from other people that it would crush me. It was just crushing to me. So I had to figure out how to filter. So I basically just tried to filter out like the 10% brightest and 10% darkest, and then everyone else was kind of on their journey. You know, it's but I still struggle with doubt within myself. But when you think about doubt, and what it's preventing, it's basically preventing the lived experience. So because if is it better to try and fail, or better to never try at all? So we end up in a point to where if you are afraid to live life, then you're basically going against the very fundamental aspects of what life is itself. So there's a level of forgiveness that we have to have within ourselves, but to do that, there's also a level of self accountability that we must have. And so when we make those, you know, when we make mistakes, and we all do, because that's part of it, that's part of the opportunity to learn. If we don't make amends for the heaviness that we may cause on to others or ourselves, then all we're doing is projecting, we'll continue to project that negative energy all over the place. And that is dangerous as hell. And when you have a society that is doing that all the time, you're basically running into what I basically call trauma narcissism, where people are basically stuck in a state of fight or flight, to where they get into the analysis paralysis, or where they're just so terrified to do anything, because they don't want to be judged, they don't want to offend, they don't want to be, you know, and it just and I think part of it is just people have been so beaten down. So so to simplify and to come kind of full circle with what you said, Liz, the way that I would approach that, and the way that I do try and approach that, is I'm never wrong to truly love. So if I, you know, make a mistake in that aspect, I will do the best I can to rectify it, hold myself accountable, but I will not doubt whether or not I was wrong to love. And I think that that's where I try and root into it, because it's really easy to kind of overcomplicate the doubt element. So I try and simplify it in that regard. So, you know, it's but this is one of the things that's important with being proactive with loving yourself, because because it's often said that that we're punished for our kindnesses. Well, if we know that, then we can put things proactively in our place to say, okay, well, you know, I do have some boundaries that are important to me, that I need to have some self accountability with, and move forward with it. So but it does seem like the doubt element related to the fear component is one of the things that is preventing people from doing a lot. And I can tell you, in transparency with myself, before I work on something, because it takes me so much energy, just from a concentration perspective, from my head injuries, and also from a pain perspective, I can tend to be very slow on working on things, even though the people who see me do it talk about how impeccable I normally do something. Once I do it, it just takes me a long time to do it. You know, I do stutter because I don't want to make a mistake, because I know how long it takes me to do it. But I try not to have judgment on myself related to the mistake. I mean, you still just have to do your best. And this actually gets connected to the 4 agreements and the 4th agreement, which is always do your best. Because if you always do your best, then you're never going to have to question whether or not you don't have to look back on it. And so if you go in things with an open heart and a loving heart, even if it doesn't pan out well, it's the loving intention that you had. And so I do want to point something out, and and clarify something that you mentioned and kind of share kind of my perspective on it, if I may. You mentioned instinct. And I see that a little bit different because I believe that human instinct can be hijacked through sophisticated psychological operations. So I would lovingly challenge the to look at that from a not instinct but intuition. So when you're in that state of calm and you have that intuitive guidance, that is what can be relied on heavily. And that is the thing that has led me through figuratively through minefields like I never thought that I would be presented with. And so
Yeah, I would
Wow,
also,
thank you. I see Diane's had her hand up, and then I think we should uh, conclude with this part of the story, as wonderful as it's been. I would say Marilyn also. And then so we will have a new beginning in a few minutes of another part of our life. But this has been so marvelous, but we can barely stop it. And Diane has had her hand up. Marilyn wants to speak, and Liz wants to speak. So let's
I
go,
have
Diane. Yes.
I have a quick comment about what was just said about what I said. That's the only reason I'm interrupting you. I'm sorry. I
Can
just
you
wanted
make
to
it
say,
okay, quick?
I just wanted to say, Denver, I don't think there's that much difference between, for me, intuition and instinct. So I'm really on the same page with you.
Great. Okay,
well, I'm just
Marilyn.
go ahead, Marilyn. Thank you.
I mean, Diane. My mistake, Diane.
Thanks so much for your story. It's very empowering, and your mother's a very fortunate woman to have you. Two questions. One is you talk about when you release, you will be received. So I'd like you to talk more about release, but my other question is also, you mentioned that you dealt with injustice and false accusations. So I'm curious how you dealt with that, like when there's real stuff in the outside world that's working against you, that's not legitimate, and how you deal with that, and also if you are loving towards that too. So,
Well, so to answer the second part first, the greatest injustice I feel is me taking someone else's projective negative energy and then projecting it onto innocent people around me. So even though that I feel that heaviness around me, um, I still try to be, I just try to be kinder to everyone. Because there's so many people going through hardships all the time, and trying to hold their family up and hold humanity up. I mean, I think that's what, the ballast of the ship, so to speak.
I'm not talking about
And
how you treat other people, but your deal with it on yourself, like being.
well, that's how I would do it is I started becoming kinder and kinder to other people because I didn't want to receive. So I basically began uh, transmuting the negative energy into positive energy. So the more negative that people put into me, the more I loved other people because it couldn't exist because the darkness couldn't exist in the light. And so when I saw that, then I just said, and so now that doesn't mean that I put love and light into the people who were trying to harm me. I just tried to, distance myself in a healthy way from them. And I tried to get proactive and learn about what I did because I was basically in a fight or flight state of of chaos and fear, which was being pushed onto me, not knowing what was going to happen. And but that's when I rooted into the fact that, the truth that was being claimed about me was not consistent with the truth that I knew within. And that was between God and I. So no matter what, I was always right with God. So, and so that's when I basically that's where this release component kind of came into to where when I released my perception of control on it was when I began to really gain control because when you can't control every aspect of your life, but what I learned is that you can you can you can guide your life in the direction that you want, and there's an ebb and a flow and a frequency to it. And so just like, whether or not you're going up a mountain, to the top of a mountain, if you go as the crow flies, you're going to have to go over jagged up ledges, and it's not the easiest way of going up it. So you're not listening. So for me, it was when I released my idea of control, or my illusion of control.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's really what it came down to. But in that greater insight is where I gained much deeper control, because I could guide my life in the direction I wanted to. So there was a peace and a release that kind of came in with that.
Okay.
So, but there was also a component to where the things happening to me in my life, I also felt like there was a purpose, a deeper purpose behind them. And when I remember having a very deep conversation with God about this one time, and I was just like, how much more do I need to be tested? And then God spoke to me and directly and said, to test you would be to imply that I doubted you, and I've never doubted you. You're being trained for what's to come. And I was like, oh, so it's not testing, it's training.
Mm-hmm.
And so that changed kind of my approach and how I received and how I accepted what was happening to me.
Mm-hmm.
And I had some boundaries and agreements with God of, this is my fundamental boundary with you, God, and this situation can't go past this because it will compromise this, and there's some other things, and God honored my boundary. He got me very close to that boundary, but he honored it. He honored me in a manner that I was outside of reality. It was unbelievable how he honored it. So, but it was only with that divine guidance. But I don't know if that helps fully answer.
Can you say more about honoring God honoring your boundary and coming close to it?
Yeah, it was, there were people trying to put me in prison for things I didn't do. And I told God that if I go to prison, then I said, I'm going to have to make compromises for my survival. And I said, and this is going to be the result of it. And so, I said, this is my boundary. So if you want me to continue this fight and what we agreed upon, then this is the boundary that I have, because this is what will result in it. And I talked to my mom about it before I talked with God about it. So she was aware of this. And what was crazy was what ended up happening was I was actually supposed to go to prison, but no one knew the law except for me somehow. And no one, they were supposed to take me to prison, but no one knew about it except me. So
I hear you saying that you changed the trajectory of your life with an intention, even though that might have been a probable future for you. You said no to that probable future, and you attained a different probable future of your timeline with that declared intention.
yeah, well, there was a compromise for my survival. There was a compromise that was going to have to come to pass, and it was a compromise that was going to violate some of my core principles, and I wasn't okay with that. So
okay, wow. Well, that's probably another 3-hour conversation. So let's go to Marilyn. Marilyn.
Yes, thank you very much, Denver. Really appreciated hearing your story and all the insights you gained from it. I used to be an avid skier myself. I've skied in Colorado and all over California. I had an accident when I was 11, last run of the day, but fortunately, all I did was break my tibia. That was it. So what you went through is, I can imagine approaching it, but not coming out of it the way you did. It's an incredible story of your healing journey. Thank you so much for sharing that. What I wanted to say, and maybe it's a good note to close on, is just share an anecdote with you about trusting the universe. 20 years ago, I signed up to attend a conference, in a little town called Cluj in Romania to meet with a mentor of mine and Diane's, the late Johann Galtung, a peace maker and peace researcher. And so, and a friend of mine in Berkeley, near where I live, Berkeley, California, was also intending to attend the conference. Well, I was in Europe early, so I went straight to Cluj. I got there ahead of time. Now, this friend of mine, Carolina Marks, she's no longer living, but she was in her early 60s at the time. She was an artist. She was extremely mobility impaired. She could only walk. She could walk, but excruciatingly slowly, one tiny step at a time. She was also very visually impaired. She could hardly see anything. She couldn't read at all and barely make out shapes, and really needed to have someone with her whenever she went anywhere. Well, she bought a plane ticket and planned to go to this conference. And the flight was to Bucharest, the capital city. And then the travel agent got her a train ticket to transfer in Bucharest from the airport to the train station and take a train to Cluj, where she was supposed to arrive at 11 o'clock at night and then get a taxi she was going to be picked up at the train station in Cluj and come to the hotel and be my roommate in the hotel. Well, I, of course, was totally worried about, how is she possibly going to manage this traveling on her own? And this is before cell phones. None of us had cell phones at that time. And so I was kind of nervous all day long. And because I knew she had to fly from San Francisco to some city in Europe, change flights to Bucharest, get to the train station, take the train, change money. She didn't have, local currency with her. At 11 o'clock at night, the door to my hotel room knocked, and there she was. And I said, "Wow, Caroline, I'm so happy to see you. How did you manage this trip?" And she said, "I just decided to trust the universe."
Mhm.
Every step along the way, strangers helped her, guided her along, and she made it. She really wanted to come to this, and that was her faith, led her to the right path.
So if such a physically incapacitated person can do it, that means everybody, all of us can do it. Everybody can. So I don't see any more hands, and I think that, well, how can we thank you enough, Denver? This has been so nourishing and so enlightening, and thank you so very much, and blessings on the rest of your path. And we will hopefully all meet again in this kind of way, and maybe in person someday. So let's take a few breaths and just thank you, Denver.